Hello and welcome to today's Environment and Energy Leader webinar sponsored by Montrose Environmental Group, an environmental services company. My name is Jessica Hunt, and on behalf of the entire team at E&E Leader, I welcome you to the present and future of real-time air monitoring. Questions specific to the presentation, as well as any technical questions, may be submitted through the Q&A chat widget, which is already opened on your screen. We just ask that before sending questions regarding video and sound, that you check your system utilizing the help widget at the bottom of your console. Please feel free to communicate with other participants, as some have already started doing, using the attendee chat feature. Let us know why you are joining us today and where you are joining us from. During today's event, attendees will have the opportunity to hear perspectives from subject matter experts in relation to air quality monitoring. This thought leadership discussion will be interactive, and attendees have the opportunity to submit questions for all presenters over the next 40 minutes or so. Please submit using the Q&A widget as well, and if we do not get a chance to answer your specific question during the live broadcast, a member of the team will follow up with you as soon as possible. And just a reminder, like all of our events at E&E Leader, this will be available on demand later this afternoon. And if you are watching this on demand, please still feel free to submit questions, because all of the questions that you submit post-live event will also be forwarded on to the team at Montrose. Additionally, E&E Leader will be providing a certificate of attendance for all attendees who meet the specific viewing criteria. And at this point, you've heard enough from me, and I'm going to turn the event over to Pat.
Thank you, Jess. My name is Patrick Clark. I'm the Vice President in the Environmental Data Platform Group at Montrose Air Quality Services. My primary focus is on air quality monitoring and measurement. I've been in the field of air quality measurement for pretty much my entire career. I'm super excited about the discussions today, because really we've seen in the last 5 years this transformation in the space of air quality monitoring and measurement. We've seen everything from really low-cost sensors that can be placed in communities to mobile platforms that can analyze for hundreds of different compounds. So real exciting time, at least for me. I have an example of how this new generation of air quality monitoring can be impactful. And this example takes place in Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia runs an air quality monitoring network. It consists of 10 different monitoring stations, highly sophisticated, very expensive equipment. It's intended to generate a very high quality data, partially to meet the requirements of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So on June 21st, 2019, there was an explosion at the Philadelphia refinery. By all accounts, it was described as a massive explosion, large fire. Community members were told to shelter in place. There were community members that went to the ER with smoke issues. It took a day to put the fire out. Satellites picked up the heat signature of the fire. It was that big. So if you looked at the air quality data from the City of Philadelphia Air Quality Network, they saw nothing. It was basically looked like a normal summer day in Philadelphia. That's because the plume and all the effects of the fire missed all the ambient air quality stations. So what we've seen now is that we can measure air quality in a very hyper-local level. And we're developing these networks that can detect not only something as large as a fire and explosion, but even small fugitive leaks. But all this is very much still in the early stages of development. So with that, I'd like to introduce our three panelists. First, we have Meredith Knopf. She is an environmental health safety supervisor at PDC Energy here in Colorado. They're an exploration and production company. Prior to PDC, she worked with a consultant primarily focused on oil and gas, and also another oil and gas company. We also have Michael Ogletree. He's the director of the Air Pollution Control Division for the state of Colorado. Before being with the state of Colorado, he's with the city and county of Denver. and he was the creator of the Love My Air program, which started out by putting particulate sensors in schools. Little known fact about Michael, he's actually, prior to this, he was a Division I soccer player and actually a professional soccer player for a short period. And last but not least, Matt Beach, he's the Vice President of Software Solutions for Montrose Environmental. Prior to coming on board with Montrose, he was the owner of a company called Sensible IoT, a software company that, amongst other things, was an enterprise solution for air quality data management. So with those introductions, if it's all right, I'm going to get the questions going. Michael, can you hear us okay?
Yep.
I'm going to take that as a yes. First question for Meredith, but really for everybody. You know, air quality data has become more and more actionable, meaning alerts can be sent out when air quality exceeds certain thresholds. Just curious how this has played out at PDC in terms of these alerts. How has it affected operations, those types of things?
Sure, and thanks for having me today. Most of our operations are in Colorado, so we're actually under a rule, Regulation 7, that requires air monitors at all our new sites that are being drilled since 2021. So we actually are required by law to receive alerts and respond to them within a certain time frame. And how we've done that is a couple things. We actually work with Montrose and have set up monitoring stations around each of our facilities that are applicable. And we actually receive alerts two ways. We receive them via email and via text. And we actually have a couple people that check that regularly, including our third-party contractor. But we also have a field monitoring room that is manned 24/7. We're now in the process of getting them to receive the alerts as well. And then we also have an on-call system, so we can work with our foreman and surface maintenance team, as well as our EHS on call, to make sure we respond to that within the required time frame. So it's definitely a multifaceted approach. We try to, especially when we're unsure of what's going on, to respond as quickly as possible to at least eliminate the issue, which again is pretty rare. We don't receive a lot of alerts, to make sure that we can identify and then correct the issue as we need to.
Yeah, Meredith, I'm curious, do you see a lot of false positive alerts where we send you an alert and you go out and you can't find anything?
Yeah, mostly, almost all the false positives are related to weather. In fact, we just had a pretty nasty storm go through our area of operations up in northeastern Colorado in the Greeley area, big chunks of hail. And when we get those severe weather events, we do have a tendency for monitors to fail. And we did have one of those last night. We still send out a team, even though the readings usually can demonstrate pretty accurately that something's amiss. Not always, and they go out and usually they can find the monitors either on the ground or waterlogged, or they fail their calibration, meaning they were damaged. So that's probably the most alerts we get is actually related to weather. And this time of year, we seem to get a lot more of those just because it's stormy.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you. You know, Michael, I'm curious, kind of the ability to send out alerts and then, you know, look for leaks or events in real time. You know, do you see this in future regulations? How do you see this from your perspective?
Yeah, you know, I think for us, we do use some of that information and data in regulations currently. As Meredith mentioned, regulation number 7 was updated to require the use of real-time monitoring. And then requiring the facilities to put together action plans based on thresholds so that they can show through reporting that they are addressing those leaks in a timely fashion. And what we've seen in the data is that it is being successful. The program was passed, I believe, in late 2021. It was required to go into action May 2020 and went into action May 1st of 2021. Yep. Yeah, so we have a little, almost close to 2 years, and we've been analyzing some of that data, and we are showing, you know, good response times from those using those systems.
So, Michael, question for you. So did you set the did the state of Colorado set the threshold? How is that
So
determined?
So the way it's done, the way the rule was passed, there's a 10-day baseline that's collected prior to the monitoring, well, prior to the production starting or any of the pre-production activities. So we have a baseline, and then using that baseline, each individual source will set its own threshold for which they would then take action. And all of those all of those plans are reviewed and approved by the division.
Yeah, and I can follow up on that. We submit plans to the division that need to be approved prior to implementation at all our locations. And PDC actually, there's, I guess, different ways. You can use VOCs or methane. So you create a trigger threshold based on that. And we use the health guidelines value for benzene to kind of back calculate and determine a health threshold that way. But there are different methodologies depending on the type of sensor and then approval, but the division approves all of them. So they're all approved through them.
Gotcha. So Meredith, if I'm understanding you correct, then you use total VOCs as somewhat of a surrogate for benzene, and then use the benzene health guideline value to back calculate a total VOC threshold, an alert based on that.
Yeah, and that's based on our own gas analyses as well too. And so we collect as part of the rule, which is these benzene sorbate tubes, which are very similar to what you saw on the refinery fence line rule as well. And we collect those on a 2-week cadence as well, unless a threshold is triggered, and then we collect those immediately and put a new one out. And those are also have their own benzene threshold that if we were to exceed that in the data collection, we would also notify the division as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Matt, follow-up question for you. We're sending out alerts, assuming email, text, most common, but in terms on the software side and being able to alert in real time, beyond alerting when pollutant value exceeds a certain threshold, what other types of things are you working on?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I think it's important when talking about alerts, and I could probably do a full hour webinar just on different types of alerts and different functionality of alerts. But really, there's the regulatory driven alerts, and then there's the community-based alerts. And some of those actually are starting to integrate with each other. So regulatory is driving community-based alerts. So when we're talking about regulatory alerts, some of the more creative and things that we've seen and we're starting to do is really getting feedback. So targeting alerts to the right operations people, making sure they're getting actionable data in those alerts. Sometimes it's not just the value, but trends or weather data or weather patterns as part of those alerts. And then, the second component where we see a lot of integration, as Meredith was talking about, is how do you integrate into these operation centers of these companies so that not only are we sending alerts, but those alerts are going through their standard procedures to be actionable and make sure that they're real alerts. So how can we combine stuff like weather as part of those to help predict events? And then also I mentioned feedback loops. So some like the app now for the community can receive feedback. You can ask the community question, was this alert helpful? And then we can base future improvements to those alerts based on their feedback. And so that's really where we're targeting those alerts at the moment and some of the ability.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Appreciate that. Another question, and I'll start with you, Meredith, if that's okay. As I mentioned, the last 5 years, new sensors, new technology being developed all the time, being implemented in ways we've never done it before. A lot of it not per a specific regulation per se, where there's, traditionally you monitor, there's a limit, you exceed it, it's an exceedance. But it's community groups, NGOs, all sorts of data being collected, and quality control, quality assurance is still, I think, being developed. Do you have concerns, just about data being collected around some of your facilities and the quality of that data?
I mean, there's different monitors used for different purposes, and I think understanding the monitor or the piece of equipment that is being used to collect the data is pretty impactful. Like, we've definitely piloted. We kind of have a little pilot program where we're piloting other monitors that are not required by Regulation 7. And what we found is some of them are really great. They function as a smoke detector. They'll let you know something is there. Their quantification is often maybe not as good. So maybe some of the monitors that are used by community organizations could potentially fall in that category. Now, we've also got a lot of other kind of monitoring happening in our basins and areas where we operate. There's flyovers, there's satellite. The CDPHE has their own monitoring device that we've partnered with them as well. And then we also understand the detection limits and the accuracy of those as well. And understanding that, there's a lot of new technology in this space. And so there could be the potential for people to not understand that. I know MeTech, which is a kind of like the place to go to test out your monitors here in Colorado, is a great place for people to take monitors and test them and kind of get that stamp. So it's complicated. I mean, there's no easy real answer to that, but definitely understanding the monitor and how it can be used. I think there is a little bit of confusion. Not all quantification tools are the same, and some tend to greatly overestimate emissions, and some can underestimate emissions. Some detection limits aren't low enough to even read the emissions. So just knowing that is super powerful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Michael, from your perspective, we want to encourage development of technologies, but we also want to collect quality data, kind of from a regulatory viewpoint. Your thoughts on quality QA/QC with a lot of the new technologies that are being deployed and collecting data as we speak.
Yeah, to Meredith's point, I think data and data quality is of the utmost importance so that you have a better understanding of what you can and can't use that data set for. I think all data sets are valuable. It's just how you implement them or use the information that they produce. And really figuring out how to best use that information. So with some of the total VOC sensors, we do have co-locations with some of our reference sites, either because they collect higher, faster resolution data that we can use as indicators, or just to validate other things that are going on in the area. It's some of these low-cost sensors and total VOC sensors are really valuable to be able to monitor in much more areas and really focus, the more advanced technology when we do see a spike in a specific area, while still keeping a pulse as to what's going on across a larger region.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm curious, Matt, when you think of air quality monitoring, quality assurance, quality control, you think of calibrating equipment. You don't think of software. Kind of on the software side, managing these networks, what kind of things can we do using software to assure data quality?
Well, I think as one of the components Michael was talking about is the ability to, with the lower cost sensors, is really deploy more sensors. And what happens when you have more sensors out in the network, you start understanding patterns of sensors and manufacturers. And so making sure you can trend on when a particular sensor or sensor technology might be trending in poor quality of data, you can see that through knowing your network. And what's interesting is when you look at a network like, let's say, the Denver network that Michael started years ago, and we've been working as partners on that, you can really tell by having all these sensors out pretty quick when one is misbehaving just by the way the others are behaving. So that's one small way to start seeing that data and trending it and improving the data quality. But data quality also goes back to, one of the first things we talked about is alerts, making sure you're getting actionable alerts, not just on values of concentration, but also if something's going on, the sensor's down, the sensor values might be sticking, and there's other quality assurances process that the software can see because it's expecting data, it's looking at data. Traditionally, 10 years ago, these equipment had self alerting, so they would send out alerts themselves. But now, because all the data is coming into one place, you can see it, you can see what's happening, you can see those trends. Is this something local or is this something vast across the network? And then kind of predict what's going on with those sensors. And so making sure the data coming in is good. When you have all that data to compare to, you can make sure that that quality of the network data is improved.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was wondering if we could check out the first poll question, maybe take a 1-minute break from questions to the panel and take a look at our first one. Have recent regulatory requirements impacted your decision-making around real-time monitoring? So I think the kind of point of this question, obviously, regulatory requirements, we're seeing things coming from states, from EPA. If you're in California, the local air districts. A lot of this is transitioned from more traditional tubes and canisters and that type of monitoring to real time. So if everybody could respond to this. I don't know how quickly we get the poll results. Could we take a look at those? I'm curious. All right, so a little over half will have be making decisions around real-time monitoring, which is a lot. And I think that's where, as we transition in terms of air quality measurement, the transition is going to be away from the tubes canisters approach to real-time monitoring. So with that, I'm going to dive back into the questions. One that's come up for us a few times is data security. In the past, data would be collected by hardware, be stored locally. We'd process that data, make a report. But now data is going from sensors via cell networks to the cloud. In some cases, it could be going to a third-party hardware company, then going to the environmental platform. So operators, their data is out there. So Meredith, I was wondering, for PDC, have there been concerns about data security? Not as much. Kind of where you guys at on that?
We're always concerned about data security. A lot of our data eventually becomes public. We have to submit it to various state agencies, but until then, they can sometimes be considered confidential business information, could lead to insider trading type stuff. There's also personal information on some of that. So PDC works very hard on our own internal data security. And then when we partner with third-party vendors, we also work with them to make sure that there's secure sign-on. We usually negotiate MSAs, so we have a better understanding of site security. Whenever we start to evaluate these types of things, we do a full business impact analysis as well. And again, to Michael's point, he has all our data for air monitoring. He gets them on a monthly basis. But so it's not, in this specific example, that comes to them every month. But still, we'd like to keep that secure until we can download it and send it, just because there could be potential for abuse. You can always hack into data and then cherry pick the information you want without the background information. So security is always forefront on our mind as an oil and gas company.
Yeah,
and so.
No, that makes sense. Matt, from your perspective, you're the software guy. What steps to ensure, data can't be hacked into and used, in a nefarious way?
Yeah, I think, that it's probably a whole nother webinar that will bore people to tears. So I won't get into the details, but most companies we work with have their data security requirements pretty defined. So we get to work inside of those frameworks. And those are standard ISO, NIST frameworks that the government and agencies put out, and they have very specific data security requirements. And even one that people don't think about that does impact this is sometimes even the HIPAA, the health information, because we're seeing the, the increased use of mobile monitoring, handhelds and vans and cars. And so that has geolocation data, trending. So how do we protect that data is very important. And, data encryption, data authentication is important. And then audible, how do you make sure that the data you're reporting is what you receive? And so we have multi-layers of security to make sure that the data we receive cannot be changed, and it's stored off in different locations. And that way we always have a trail of exactly how that data came through the system, where it went through, and how it got reported out. One extra little piece inside of our software that we do is every time you request data, is it checks to make sure that user has access to that particular data point, not just that sensor or that organization. It goes all the way down to a data level. And then we provide our clients with exactly who has access to that data. So even Montrose, where we might be doing maintenance on multiple different organizations, our users have to go and authenticate to that organization. They cannot be authenticated to multiple organizations at the same time, ensuring data quality, data parity for those organizations. So it's always evolving. There's always new standards coming out. So being up to date on those and making sure you're taking those steps are important.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I appreciate that. Michael, I have a question for you, and I'm not putting you on the spot here, but again, back in the day, reports were submitted hard copies. We've advanced to electronic report submittal via PDF. But obviously, we're collecting all this data in real time electronically. It seems like we'll get to a point where data is flowing electronically, and then we're able to amass all that data to make informed decisions. I imagine that's on your mind, knowing you. Could you just kind of speak to that from your perspective?
Yeah, so we're going through a pretty big transformation here at the Air Division. We do have antiquated systems that, through some significant funding from the legislature in 2022, we are, modernizing our backend data infrastructure and connecting all the previously de-siloed data sets, as well as switching to more automated systems that are no longer paper-based. It'll take some time for us to get there, but I think as we see a lot more data being collected around the state of Colorado, we're looking at ways to bring that data into one space to be able to make informed decisions quicker. There are events that occur across the state where we need to be able to look at different data sets, and right now we're visiting several different sites. And once we have all of the real-time data in one place, it makes our response as the local public health agency much quicker. So having access to more real-time data from different data networks all in the same place is really something we're looking to implement in the shorter term, because it is important. And we are seeing, as we're doing more monitoring across the state, we are seeing additional events and want to make sure we can be responsive.
So, examples, there's a lot of data being collected everywhere. So some of these networks, Colorado Reg 7, real-time monitors, like what other data do you envision bringing in to a database at some point?
Yeah, so there's other research monitoring that's going on along the Front Range. There's other federal grants that are providing funding to different community groups. ARP recently, or through ARP funds, the EPA awarded it to, I believe, 6 different entities across the state of Colorado. There's community groups down in Pueblo and other areas collecting all of this data. There's people putting up purple airs in their backyards. Some cities are doing things like Denver is doing and putting up, their own distributed sensor networks. So in my mind, as we look forward, how do we get all of that data in one place? And part of that is through some kind of standardization, some kind of QA/QC requirements. And it's something we're looking forward to to doing, hopefully within the year, figuring out how we can create a common data standard that has QA, QC requirements and indicators so that we know how we can best use each of those data sets to inform decision making.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, from your perspective, any issues with trying to, it seems like everybody, there's various networks set up, all doing things in little different ways to standardize that from a software perspective. Heavy lift, not so bad. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think the answer is yes. I think with the regulatory agencies putting out data standard requirements, and then from a quality standpoint, is important to make sure that that data is kind of consistent across all data sets. One of the bigger challenges with that amount of data in those different data sets is what frequency are you monitoring? How many times per minute or per hour? And those can be night and day versus, hourly collecting versus minute collecting. So making sure that the standard, the recording, and then from a data side is really how are we sending that? What's the standard way we receive it? And what's the standard way we send it, to make sure that when these agencies have these databases or systems that are consolidating this air quality, everybody's playing at the same level and can get that data to them quickly for them to be able to ingest it. But the vast amount of data is always going to be challenging. We're doing millions, almost 10 million records a day in different types of air quality data. So how do you take that, make sure it's quality data, and then package that and put it to the regulatory agencies is always going to be challenging. And doing it, making it not cost prohibitive for the organizations to share that data. But we are seeing a lot more data sharing out there, and communities are monitoring and industry's monitoring. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and that's just the state of Colorado. Then you think about trying to do that, in the entire United States. It's going to be a challenge and a lot of data. Let's take a pause and look at the second poll question, if that's okay. This question is, will you have any air quality monitoring needs in the next 3 to 12 months? And really, this is a question just kind of designed to, is this something in the future for some of you, or is it, you're dealing with this now? So if, everybody could answer, and then we could look at the poll results. This one I'm curious about. All right, maybe we'll give everybody a few minutes for this one, and then I'm going to back to questions, and then we could revisit it. I've got a question, and this is relatively new, developing, and it's for you, Meredith. Any oil and gas operator, petrochemical plant has to do periodic leak detection and repair inspections using either optical imaging camera or it's called EPA Method 21 with a sniffer. So Flint Hills Resources was just awarded an alternative means of emission limitation, basically an alternative methodology for looking at leaks. And basically in this, what I call an AML, they're using sensors to do 24/7 monitoring for leaks. And if it goes the way they want it to, they will not have to do periodic inspections using Method 21 and OGI. So curious, this was granted in February of this year. It's the first one in the country. Is that on PDC's radar at all, using sensors in lieu of the periodic inspections?
Yes, it's a little different in Colorado. The state actually has to approve the vendor for AIM, alternative emissions monitoring, and I believe one has been approved and a second company is pending. And so we have looked at that. It's not quite as easy from a logistical standpoint. Flint Hills is obviously a refinery. We've got about 600 plus oil and gas operations. So when you're having using these continuous emission monitors for leak detection, you have to be prepared and ready to have a response team out once those are detected. So we are exploring those for sure. We have not basically decided to do that. We're still using our OGI cameras. We have about 21 teams that go out, and in Colorado we actually do monthly monitoring at our larger sites, and no less than, I think we're up to just doing it twice a year voluntarily, just because it's at our smaller sites. So it is on my radar. It operates a little bit different in Colorado, and it does take a lot of consideration and time and resources. However, it can be super valuable, and that's why as we start using these sensors more often, we actually also have a camera that can sense leaks as well. And we've had to develop a standard operating procedure for when that camera detects leaks, because it's out there continuous. It's not part of the former LDAR program, but we treat that as an observation, just as if a pumper was out there and saw it, or just as if one of our camera operators were out there as well. So there's a lot of considerations. And I saw a question that says, do you have to monitor for methane as well? And for right now in Colorado, the only requirement, is for methane is a little spurious. I mean, you can use methane as a proxy for our required rate 7. We choose to use VOCs because we can attach a health guidance value to it, but I think other companies use it. And, obviously the camera can pick up methane. We are oil and gas methane partnership signatories, and so we will be required to monitor methane as part of that, but it's a requirement on a voluntary basis to be part of that partnership. So that's kind of my long-winded tangential response to that question.
No, that was good. I wasn't sure how much on your radar that was. Michael, in terms of the state of Colorado, do you see that as the future, or is it, 5-10 years down the road, or kind of what are your thoughts?
Methane monitoring?
Now, continuously, we call it a leak detection sensor network, but using sensors that'll monitor 24/7 for leaks, as opposed to, 6-month quarterly inspections.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's something, as technology evolves, it might be something that we could potentially consider. Technology right now in this space is evolving very quickly, and there's all different types of ways to do it, from direct measurement to, all different kinds, even calculated emissions based on, flows to a flare, let's say. So I think it's hard to predict when something like that will be more widely adopted, but I think with the rapid advancement of technologies, it's something that is definitely something we're looking at.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think we have the question 2 poll results. If we could go back to those. Yeah, interesting. 1/3 immediate needs, 1/3 not, and 1/3 not sure. So again, this seems like a topic that if you're not involved in it now and you're in the environmental space, you soon will be. Question 4, I'm going to start with Michael. State of Colorado's invested a fair amount in mobile monitoring platforms, so not traditional fixed monitoring. Just kind of can you share your thoughts on mobile monitoring versus fixed monitoring? How's that been working out for the state? What have you learned?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different mobile monitoring that we have. They're all named after animals. We have
Can you share those
camel.
Animal names, please?
Yeah. So we have a camel, which is a community air monitoring mobile lab. We have a moose, which is a mobile optical. I forget what the rest of it is. But we also have a cat, which is a community air toxics. That's also a mobile lab. Then we have an emu, which is the emissions measurement unit. So the latter 3 can actually drive around while they're doing measurements. The camel, actually is using UV DOAS to look at plumes, while the cat and the emu are more ground-based monitoring, and all four of those are related to specific projects and specific funding. I think with the high resolution mobile monitoring, it's a lot of data, right? We're talking data points every 3 seconds or less. And so with that high volume of data, I know EPA has created a tool to analyze some of that. We're looking to try that out, see how it works. But it's just so much data that's being collected, and it can be used. It can be used in ways to identify different potential sources in different areas. We'll see. Some of those units are relatively new, and our team's gotten trained on them early this year. But they all are specific requirements through some of the regulations. But it is going to be an enormous amount of data. So one of the reasons we really need to be careful about how we develop our backend system. We do have a project team looking at how we're going to be able to use that, and really interested to see how we use that in the evolution of that monitoring and the analysis of it on a mobile platform.
Yeah, the amount of data, we have our own mobile monitoring platform as well, and the volume of data is, it's shocking almost. I guess, Matt, from on your end, are we able to ingest that much data at high rates of speed? If so, what speed for these mobile monitoring platforms in real time?
Yeah, the answer is yes. The more detailed answer of what that looks like is depending on the use case. When we talk about mobile monitoring, it can be everything from real-time monitoring to grabbing the data and trying to give a feedback loop as quick as possible. So near real time, with a couple second lag to a couple minute. Again, when you're getting down to the second data, being able to do real time monitoring mobile all the way back up to the cloud is very difficult just from a data transfer standpoint. So generally the data comes in chunks every minute to 2 minutes, gets analyzed, and then give back to some sort of operator screen. So it's a combination of what's running locally on that monitor and then cloud-based. And it depends, because sometimes these mobile monitors are set on kind of a prescribed path. They just keep doing it over and over. And how many times do you have to go over and over to make that data valuable? Is it 6 times, 7 times? And then, so what you're doing is not only taking that data, and now you're trying to compare it to 7 other days of 1 second data. And that's where it becomes challenging, making sure that you have the processing power to do that, because those are more operational. Now, there's also events where you're trying to understand where something's coming from, and mobile's really advantageous for that. So the real-time monitoring and the real-time aspect's much more important, because you got to drive, stop, see if you see anything, drive, stop. Sometimes it's like a hot, cold game that you used to play as kids, hotter, hotter, cold, cold, come back. And so we try to provide triangulation and source detection in real time on that second data. And each one presents its own challenges. And some of these it's not just one compound every second, it's multiple, it's 20, 30 compounds that you're searching for. So it's a very complex problem. And we've been doing mobile monitoring. I've personally been part of mobile monitoring for probably 6 or 7 years when some of these low-cost sensors started coming out, all the way up to recently where there's vans and community monitors and handhelds, is like I talked about before. So we're not just doing 1 or 2 vans. We've probably have 10 to 20 different mobile devices out there at any given time collecting data. Another component of that is, how do you keep them calibrated? How do you know when you're coming next to a regulatory station, being able to calibrate to those? So there's a lot of challenges with mobile monitoring, but it's great to see, and it's very useful, very specific needs, very good for specific needs.
No, that makes sense. Appreciate that, Matt. I have one more question I want to get to for the panel, and then we'll do the last poll question, and then maybe we'll switch it over to questions from the attendees. This is kind of an easy one, but mostly Meredith and Michael. What with kind of a lot of the community monitoring, fence line monitoring, a lot of things we're doing really are offering or providing us opportunities to educate, kids in schools through outreach, community, not only on air quality, but on how your processes run. People, there's a facility, nobody knows really what's going on the other side of the wall when you're drilling. There could be concerns about air quality, and all this sharing of information we've really just seen recently. So I'll kind of just throw it out to the panel, but your thoughts just on, community outreach, community education, youth education in terms of both air quality and the, processes.
You want to go first?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a lot of what I did in Denver, right? How do we better educate community, different stakeholders on what we're doing? So, we're looking to replicate a lot of that work across the state of Colorado in terms of education to communities. And I think really working with those communities. The Love My Air program that was developed in Denver was co-developed not only with the state and other stakeholders, but also with community. As these different community groups come on who are starting to do some of this monitoring, kind of working closely with them to make sure that they're collecting data that is valid, that we can use, and that really meets their end need. I feel a lot of times people are standing up sensor networks or monitoring networks with just the goal of measuring and thinking that they could use some of that data further on down the line. But how do we as regulatory agencies work with those groups early on in their projects and provide them expertise and resources and give them the ability to collect data that we can then use in some kind of regulatory space or, to identify potential issues that we could do further follow-up. So I think kind of as we think about what the future looks like in terms of collaboration between regulatory agencies and others doing monitoring, not only industry groups, but also community groups, figuring out how to best engage and share some of the expertise and what we've learned so that we can have a better understanding and a better relationship with those entities collecting that information and data.
Yeah, and
I appreciate. Go ahead, Meredith.
And I can add to that kind of from industry perspective. I mean, PDC, we're pretty proud to operate here in Colorado. All our employees live and work. Most of our employees live and work near a lot of our operating well pads. And so we're really proud of the work we have done to reduce our emissions here over the last, since 2014, really, and to date, the amount of emissions that our oil and pad sites may emit has dramatically reduced, and that's part of innovation, technology, collaboration with the APCD and the COGCC with new rulemakings, and so being able to share that information and how we've innovated in just the recent couple years, I think is pretty exciting for us, and we welcome that opportunity. And I think we also welcome that opportunity to work with the APCD to educate community in the kinds of emissions that we're seeing at our locations, because I think there is a fair amount of misinformation out there, and a well operator in Colorado is very different than a well operator potentially in a different state too. And so I think there's a lot of good here in Colorado, and we're kind of proud of the work we've done.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that, when I first started doing this, I didn't realize, we never did a lot of community outreach. We didn't engage school kids or community members. And honestly, it's kind of one of the more rewarding aspects of the job to be able to have these conversations with the people that work and live around these in the communities. So if we could go to the last poll question, throw that up, and then maybe we'll do a couple of questions from the attendees. So this question, pretty straightforward. Are you currently utilizing real-time air quality monitoring? If you could answer that. And in the meantime, we have a question for you, Meredith. What value does PDC Energy get from 24/7 monitoring of methane if done voluntarily for the OGMP? And can you provide some specifics?
Sure. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership, but it is a partnership between United Nations Environmental Defense Fund and then operators along with the Climate Action Group. I'm forgetting their name. And so basically, it's a great opportunity for PDC. We've set methane intensity reduction targets here over the next 5 to 10 years with that goal of getting closer and closer to zero. And so it's a way to lend credibility to that, right? The UNEP reviews all our monitoring data and determines kind of the validity of it. And there's different levels within the OGMP, and the goal is you need to get to the 5th level, which is site level monitoring, and then a reconciliation between direct measurement, like whatever that could be, using a monitor for direct measurement as well. And so you have to reconcile site level. And so we're looking at 24/7 methane monitors for that site level piece, and it wouldn't be independent of other options as well. And there you are reconciling your direct measurement information, and there's that opportunity to see what the overall methane flux is at a facility, and then what you're doing in a direct measurement, like what you're submitting to subpart W, or in our case, we also submit methane and other greenhouse gases to the state every year through Colorado emissions inventory. And so seeing the reconciliation between what our direct measurements are and then what the overall site level can lend insight into, and knowing there's error bars in both types of measurement, especially right now with all the emerging technology. And then, seeing if maybe our direct measurement is too high, like we have a better opportunity to get better measurement data to kind of refine that. Or maybe we're potentially missing an emission source, though in Colorado, I find that unlikely, but you never know. And trying to figure out that so that we can really work towards reducing that methane flux from our locations. And those monitors also work great. They all have weather vanes, and you can also pinpoint. They work just like any other leak detection too. So it can pinpoint within a certain area. Like we know that the monitor is picking up something at a tank, for example, and we can send someone right out there, and they can pinpoint the location for a tank. Some of the monitors can get even more detailed than that. Like they can find the specific thief hatch or pressure relief valve from where there could potentially be a leak. So there's definitely different ways to use it, but that's kind of the OGMP requirement. And we found it pretty helpful too. We've modified some of our methodologies out there as a result of what some of our monitors are seeing. Even if it's not something that's triggering a threshold, we have much lower internal thresholds that we also look at so that we can refine our operations and continue to reduce any kinds of emissions that we have at our site.
Nope, you're muted, Pat.
Sorry, we had a delivery here in the office. Thank you, Matt. Let's go back to the poll question and see the results. About a third right now are involved currently using real-time air quality monitoring. I was going to guess 50-50. I imagine over the years those ratios will change. Again, any questions you have, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I have one here for Michael. You mentioned technology is rapidly advancing and changing. What have you seen as the biggest advancement within the environmental space in terms of monitoring?
It's a tough question.
Yep.
I think for us, one of the things that we're really interested in is speciated BTEX. So we are piloting, testing some of that out to see how it works. And when I say speciated BTEX, I mean kind of in like a lower form without as much requirement for something like a GC or more expensive instrumentation, something that's relatively low cost that can accurately identify BTEX compounds. It's a significant concern for us with a lot of the oil and gas activity. And from some of Meredith's comments, trying to use total VOCs to identify and correlate to BTEX, I think it's something that industry is concerned about as well. So as we look through different technologies, that's one that we'll be piloting and testing out side by side with things like GCs and other instrumentation that we know can accurately measure BTEX.
Is that optical equipment, Michael?
It's a better question for my very technical team. I'm not exactly sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we use the GCs, and we're starting to work with some UV equipment for that as well. Question for Meredith. Let's see how we're doing on time. Got a few more minutes. And I think Reg 7 is unique, and maybe if you could walk folks through that. Do you have to monitor for methane as well? Are there state or EPA regulations as well as local?
So the focus for Regulation 7 is monitoring. You can choose whether your option is methane or VOCs. We've selected VOCs. There's no federal requirement at this time to do continuous monitoring of methane. I mean, I think there's a lot of flurry in the air that could change here. But in Colorado, it's basically just kind of, a little bit past fence line monitoring to make sure we're just, there aren't emissions. We can permit emissions, but then beyond emissions that might be larger or indicate a malfunction or something like that. And so we are not required to monitor methane unless you opt into that through Regulation 7. Like I said, PDC has opted for VOCs. All our methane monitoring that we're currently piloting and we'll be doing at least in the near future will be voluntary.
Yeah, I think it's, and I've never seen this in by any other regulatory body, but you can, Reg 7 says you can monitor for methane, total VOCs, or benzene if you opted to do that, and the operator gets to choose. And I don't know, Michael, maybe but I think almost 100% are monitoring for total VOC. Is that your understanding?
So it is the vast majority. I don't think it's all of them, but certainly the vast majority are using total VOCs. And having been on the Air Quality Control Commission when that rule was passed, I think a lot of our thought at the time was to allow for flexibility and really push the envelope in, detecting and measuring all three of those, right? Methane monitoring technology is getting better, and hopefully it'll get even better, and we'll be able to use that in some of the Reg 7 total VOC. Obviously, we've pushed the envelope in a lot of changes in some of that technology and different vendors coming on and utilizing that data in different ways. So we'll revisit that regulation here, I believe in 2024, and update it to make sure that we are employing the latest technology available and getting better and better data out from the regulation that we can then use to inform future decision making.
Yeah, and continuous benzene is a tricky one because there really isn't good technology for continuous benzene at this time. And so, we're using those passive samplers for benzene that you collect. And then if we were to trigger a threshold, we actually deploy SUMA canisters as well. So we get that speciation data as well. But there's definitely room for improvement in that speciation, which is what Michael was speaking to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We're pretty much at the top of the hour, 12:59. Any last thoughts from the panel before we kind of sign out? Michael, you were able to successfully do this in the lobby of a hotel, so nice work. I had my doubts at the beginning, I'm not going to lie.
I think, for me, I think, the future of air monitoring is changing very, very quickly. I think there's a lot of new companies coming on who are developing new technologies. Many people are trying those out and figuring out how to best utilize those, including regulatory agencies. So I think looking forward, it's really interesting and exciting what technology companies are developing, and really looking forward to testing some of those out and then implementing them in ways that produce good data that we can then use for rulemakings or identifying potential areas that we hadn't done monitoring in the past. So I think it's really an exciting time.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. A lot of cool stuff happening and very impactful stuff, most importantly. I'm just Matt, Michael, Meredith. I think the four of us can sit around and do this all day if people let us. We love talking about this stuff. So thank you. Definitely appreciate your time. Everybody who attended, thank you for your time. I'm sure people have meetings at the top of the hour they probably have to jump to. Before we go, Jess, anything from Environment and Energy?
I just want to thank the panel for being here today. Really enjoyed listening, to the discussions that we had. And just a reminder to all attendees that you can still submit questions, even post live event, if something comes to mind after the fact, after we wrap up. And we just want to thank you guys for being here today. So looking forward to working with the team at Montrose again soon. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.